Surviving Depression in a Depressing World, an Ecological Perspective. Chapter 2, The Environmental Influence, Corporate Devolution versus Ecology and Biophilia. Most qualified therapists who treat depression are in a compromised position. They may agree, yet never verbally admit, that we do live in a depressing world. Some might secretly share this opinion, but their work and function are to focus on helping the patient. The work of a therapist or a counselor is to help facilitate a path to help the patient balance their internal turmoil, to support the patient in finding a way to mental and emotional health and mentor the patient while they become more in touch with their more valid feelings. A therapist or a counselor can help a patient process, realize and release their emotions in a safe space, so that the patient can become more functional again and not overwhelmed or doomed or feeling hopeless. While the therapists and counsellors do a great job at this, very little consideration has been given to the role of our environment or nature and the part it plays in our mental health. Not much is talked about in mainstream psychology regarding our lack of connectedness to nature. Yet in contemporary society, the rise of depression and suicide in the West is exponential. Westerners have lost their ancient knowledge and myths that help us maintain a connection to the earth. Our current lifestyle keeps us separate from nature. Ecotherapy or ecopsychology has only recently begun to emerge in Western civilization as a subject in academia for therapists and counsellors to consider regarding our relationship with nature. Ecopsychology is more widely practiced in the United States. In contrast, it is hardly known in Europe. In the UK, it's only starting to emerge as a necessary bridge to reconnect with nature. In other developing countries, ecopsychology isn't necessary since it comes under other names in indigenous cultures. Their connection with the earth is a spiritual way of life for people living off the land and people living in the forest. The Incas and the Mayan cultures offer blessings to Pachamama and the ancestors. People in the forest have their own spiritual relationship with the forest as consciousness itself, that they speak through via entheogens, by using shamans and plant medicines such as ayahuasca. These are traditional customs which involves celebrating nature and detoxing the mind and body to maintain a strong connection to nature and earth. Similarly, we can find the same echoed in Native American mythology, Aboriginal Dreamtime stories, nature and their ancestors, and in the same in various African cultures. Today, in this political and economic and environmental crisis, we cannot deny that what we do to nature and what we put out into our external environment is coming back to us through the ecosystems and having a detrimental effect on human mental and physical health. There is a global rise in depression in response to environmental destruction. Some people feel that the current level of political corruption driving this is so deep that there is nothing we can do to change things. These people will often use the words us and them, them being the oligarchy, the control system, or many know them as secret societies that control the puppet charade paraded in the theatre of politics. It is easy to feel overwhelmed when you become aware of these issues. I too at times felt overwhelmed and believed that the level of environmental devastation, animal and human exploitation was not something we could easily change after dedicating my life to this field. I have worked in the environmental field for around 15 years. Unfortunately, the more I learned, the more it has affected my internal and emotional state. The conclusion I came to were that the powers that be conveniently ignore a lot of the sustainable solutions to many of humanity's problems, solutions that some authorities purposely create obstacles to access in order to stop people switching to. How they do this is by not providing supporting infrastructure for these solutions and keeping these solutions repressed or hidden from the public. If governments truly cared about the environment, they would advocate and advertise these available solutions, and instead of putting money into war, they would invest more funds into technological advances that are environmentally friendly for energy production, food production, fuel, and alternatives to plastic pollution. This is explored more in depth in my first book in the silent ecocide. Meanwhile, we are to continue to rely on the archaic system that makes money for the predatory aristocracy, eroding the quality of life for ordinary people and contaminating the environment. Corporations have a great deal of power to control economic resources, more so than most people can imagine. Lobbying is an accepted form of legal bribery in the United States because politicians earn substantial sums of money. Hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars from corporations are funneled through lobbying agencies. This is one of the driving forces of ecocide and the reason why environmental laws are quickly being destroyed by politicians. So when you are researching solutions to these environmental problems and find these things out, there is no valuable long-term conservation solution to the ecological crisis. The only thing one can do with this phenomena is to raise awareness on solutions and what each of us can do individually. The problem is a reflection of flawed governance, neglecting to protect natural resources for profit, a crisis in human consciousness. It doesn't take an expert to work out that human society is profoundly dysfunctional, and many of us are finding out how shockingly corrupt society is in the political and economic systems we previously put our faith, taxes and services into. It is becoming very apparent that many in the Western system, that the system set up, are designed to make the 1% elite richer rather than serve humanity or to resolve any of the dysfunctional aspects of society that need to be addressed. The word career is a programmed illusion that people are invested in, and it is not until we are knocked by economic loss that we realize, especially in times of this global financial crisis. The only way to survive today's volatile society is to be able to be adaptive and acquire new skills to transit from one profession to another or from one country to another. This is a time when automation is taking over more professions, and when 1% of the world's wealthiest people are raking in 87% of all financial wealth made in 1 year, as documented in the statistics of 2017. It is testimonial that we live under a corrupt financial system that only benefits those in power and is continuously hammering down the rest of humanity. If we don't change this, things will get far worse. The increased level of air pollution and toxins in our food and water are also a sign that the world would benefit from becoming more holistic and sustainable. We are our environment physically and mentally, and we already treat the environment as a dumping ground. How does this reflect on our current state of consciousness? Furthermore, our physical health is suffering, and the medical industry is profiting. It is no wonder that the rise in cancer and autoimmune illness are so high. Additionally, the corporate government is treating the environment as an environmental laboratory and humanity as the involuntary lab rats. At the peak of the technological boom, in a time when we have more wealth controlled by a million of the wealthiest people in the world, the consequence is more poverty, which shows we need a more economical, sustainable system that considers the parameters of the environment. Why do people not question why there is no homogenized progress in modern technology? How can we have Wi-Fi but not alternative energy to produce wireless electricity? How come people are still driving cars with engines that use petrol, which hasn't changed since 1885? Yet we have access to new technologies such as compressed air cars, hydrogen fuel cell cars, and electric cars and solar cars, but no infrastructure to encourage people to use these alternative green vehicles. The reason being is all this technology is available for people to have a freer, better quality of life. But it's being kept from us to keep us in a stasis so the elite can protect and maintain their wealth and power. Despite more people being aware of the environmental problems, we have far less environmental conservation jobs, and ecological science is the lowest paid scientific job today than it was 40 years ago. There is no such thing as real conservation laws, while corporations own politicians who rewrite environmental laws to suit the corporate agenda. The deterioration of environmental laws is an essential example of political and democratic devolution. It's hypnotic hypocrisy that many are captive in continually campaigning to change. However, it's the system that requires an update. The word democracy makes a mockery in today's version of what democracy looks like in the West. Other products of corporate devolution are the repression of natural cures for cancer and other illnesses and diseases. The pharmaceutical industry sees nature cures as a threat to their profit-making agendas rather than allowing these alternative choices to coexist with their monopolized synthetic pills in a multi-billion-dollar industry. Anyone that is not profoundly saddened by current global events are either in denial or very disconnected from the earth and their true nature. Depression is an intelligent and empathic responsive sign of a healthily functioning human being to the current crisis. To be feeling depressed in such times shows that those of us affected by what is happening in the world around us have awareness and are compassionate and caring. The problem is that the undiagnosed mental illness of psychopathy and denial of people in government and of people that hold positions of power who are exploiting their status for the benefit and profit of small groups of elite. Their mental illness is a psychopathy dominated by an obsession with making money and controlling humanity as a priority, sacrificing nature and human life. The suffering of others, environmental degradation and species extinction is the ultimate price we are all paying. In these times, the requirement to be in a position of power, the main qualification is a lack of sentience or empathy and a complete disregard for the rights of nature, let alone human rights. When this is the case, how are we supposed to transcend the powers that govern us if this system is being run by the mentally unfit and which is destructive to our environment and therefore the future of humanity? A society or a system that is rigid, steeped in secrecy and closed to developing its core systems has become stuck in a corrupt, archaic system of stagnancy that sees anyone that requests or tries to improve, evolve, or update the system as a threat to itself. It is at this point that such a governing system becomes something else. It is no more than a predatory virus, in the way that Paul Levy described the Wetico virus in his book, the virus that has infected humanity. The Wetico is the name that comes from Native Americans when describing white man's mental illness. It has become a threat to the planet and hence the survival and evolution of mankind. Many of us are going through different stages of realizing this, considering that the rise in depression indicates psychological symptoms of the collective unconscious, the noosphere, a reaction to the world in its current stage of ecocidal apocalypse. We may think that these feelings or frustrations, anger, grief and depression are a reflection of personal problems. And of course, yes, we all do have our emotional baggage, insecurities to work through. Still, the bigger picture is that these symptoms are indications that something is deeply wrong with the core of modern human society. The global rise in depression is a reflection of this. There are beautiful things that the Western world has done for people. Independent artists and musicians, scientific advances in surgical medicine, inventions, technological developments, innovations and pioneers. Still, we also need to apply innovation and change to society's core systems to become more holistic and environmentally friendly, because society currently has a toxic and predatory nature that we could do without in modern capitalism. The notion of business with immediate profit has created our collective dysfunctional ideas and beliefs about ourselves in relation to nature and other species. There is a great deal of ecological ignorance and misunderstanding and political manipulation of environmental science to suit government agendas. Imagine if we were all ecologically educated in primary and secondary schooling, and education was enhanced by improving ecological literacy. What if we had the opportunity to select environmentally minded politicians in decision-making governance? The outcome would be abundant natural resources, clean water and energy for all. Sustainable societies focused on evolving human consciousness and knowledge, and an ecologically peaceful planet. In some approaches to treating and understanding depression relating to cognitive behavioral therapy and gestalt therapy, depression is understood as an adaptive process to the stressful environment. In most cases, the patient has withdrawn themselves in various ways from engaging in the world. I personally like Jeff Foster's view on depression, which is the need for the individual to conserve energy, to withdraw and take a deep rest. The only problem is we also need to function, to work, pay our bills and keep up with the rent. Nevertheless, we cannot argue with our subconscious needs, and sometimes to take the higher priority for this. It is about accepting that we are depressed. This is a time when our inner self requires more in-depth nurturing, rest, self-awareness and holistic healing. We must take time to strengthen the body and mind, to regain momentum, to physically, mentally and emotionally interact with the world. In such times, we will turn to psychologists, and if we can afford it, psychotherapists for pills and medication when we are experiencing thoughts about suicide. These can help us through the darkest days. Yet, we must take responsibility to try to maintain ourselves when we have our strength back, to make some changes that could help us manage depression more sustainably, so as not to become overly dependent on pills in the long term. Ecologists study and look at different biological and abiotic factors in systems, mainly related to ecosystems and how they work in relation to one another. Should one ecosystem become dysfunctional, what has caused this and how does it affect species and the rest in ecosystems? From an in-depth ecological perspective, depression is an indication that human understanding of itself in relation to the natural world needs an upgrade. We need to change since we lack respect for our environment and are polluting it at an alarming rate. This is why autoimmune diseases, cancer and depression have risen with industrial and technological development. As a result, more toxic chemicals accumulate in our air, oceans, soil and water and cause severe pollution with irreversible consequences. The academic books, journals, nor doctors can identify a single cause of depression. Immunology research has determined that the immune system is a significant factor. The gastrointestinal tract is the largest immune organ in the human body, which is continuously being exposed to environmental pathogens. What we put in our body or breathe in impacts our immunology and brain. We need to take into account that environmental pollutants and chemical toxicity in our food and water cause autoimmune problems that affect our brain. These factors cause symptoms of an overactive immune system. Depression is a product of symptoms related to this. Therefore, a healthy external environment would reduce the number of people suffering from depression. If only we had a government that cared about the environment and people's mental health. Most people do not connect the increase in external pollution, chemicals in water and food in causing the global depression rise. Still, we are our environment, and this is one irrefutable fact. We have gone over the ecological tipping point level of environmental and industrial pollution. The overuse of pesticides, industrial waste and geoengineering, that spraying of nanoparticles, aluminium, barium, strontium and viruses such as mycoplasmas, toxic aerosol chemicals for weather engineering has been used for decades and is globally ubiquitous. This means even places from where organic food is grown, it is at risk of some sort of soil, air and water contamination due to aerosol spraying. Mycoplasmas, nanoparticles and chemicals can be breathed in or ingested with water or food, which can be trapped into epithelial tissues in the body, causing autoimmune and inflammatory problems that lead to depression and other long-term health problems. The new 5G microwave hertz is also of great concern to scientists, and its impact on our neural, endocrine and physical health, which is why scientists are warning people of the rise in Alzheimer's and cancers. Therefore, in contemporary society, our internal biochemical, biological and mental ecology is severely disrupted and under constant attack. It's necessary to regularly detox your body and remove heavy metals, employing juicing, chelation, drinking only distilled water, additionally taking colloidal silver, diatomaceous earth, spirulina and Rubbel's iodine. All help to combat these modern harsh environmental influences on our physical and mental well-being. In most large urban cities, there is often a problem with air pollution, and it is difficult to believe that there are parts of China and Taiwan where the air pollution is so harmful that people are unable to go out even without a mask. They are buying bottled oxygen from New Zealand to breathe when they go outside. During 2011, studies were done on mice exposed to air pollution. The effects cause inflammation in the hippocampus part of their brains. So learning, solving problems and symptoms associated with depression were detected. Research on the human genome shows that only 10% of all diseases are related to the genome. 90% of all human illnesses are related to environmental factors. There is a growing body of theoretical and empirical work on the effects of environmental degradation on people's health and happiness. One paper found that using a log linear method for a panel of 21 countries from the period of 1970 to 2005 showed that environmental degradation affects the happiness of people. As environmental degradation increases, people's happiness decreases. Furthermore, economic growth is found to have a positive and significant impact on happiness of the people, whereas wage inequality and cost of living had a negative significant effect. Modern ecological economics has also proven the traditional assumption that the level of consumption of market goods and gross national development is a close approximation to a social welfare function. Put simply, human happiness and well-being does not correlate with material wealth, but does depend more on environmental health. Even the most conservative interpretations of the relationship between income and well-being indicate that well-being is not determined by consumption alone. When we separate ourselves from nature mentally and emotionally, we separate ourselves from the ability to find that place to feel safe, to feel connected to nature, to have a dialogue with nature. This is a magical thing because feeling at one with Earth, at peace with nature, is one of the best feelings in the world. In 1983, Edward Wilson wrote a book examining the relationship between our well-being connected to our relationship with Earth in his book by the Biophilia hypothesis. As an aspect of human well-being and environmental well-being is the emotional effect of learning about species loss and environmental degradation on one's personal mental well-being are clearly detrimental to a person's mental health. Scientists Gaudi and Carbonell in 2007 set up empirical testing of Edward Wilson's biophilia hypothesis. The results were astounding. 85% of their participants reported concern about animal extinction. The relationship between human well-being and the attitude towards pollution and species loss is so interconnected. It is not only pollution that negatively affects a human individual's well-being, but also the preoccupation of the impact of pollution on species loss. The concern with biodiversity loss is a sign of caring about the living world. Individuals that care about the biodiversity loss are demonstrating a psychological connection with other living organisms, which Edward Wilson described as biophilia. Therefore, the positive relationship with nature and its preservation and our well-being are unequivocally profoundly connected. As a result, we have to start accommodating for these principles in the way we do business. We need to redesign business and economy to a more sustainable level so that we can become ecologically symbiotic with Earth rather than predatory to nature. Concerns about species extinction lend support to those who argue that humans receive positive psychological benefits from caring about other species. This is a fascinating study and gives those of us already deeply concerned about the state of the planet some hope. The importance of environmental awareness to human well-being shows that we do in fact get depressed if we know the environment is being destroyed, concluding that showing concern about nature, landscapes, interactions with plants and wildlife is positively connected with human well-being, while the opposite is true for showing interest about negative environmental features, pollution, for example. The global economic systems would benefit from interacting ecological concepts into economy and society. However, governments prefer to ignore this vital necessity. So if we are to live fairly on this earth, something has to change within the system. Or people in communities have to create an alternative system that is more sustainable and holistic